all figured out. I marched up to my mom, looked her in the eye, and told her I finally knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. A gardener. I wanted to spend my days watering plants and mowing lawns and preserving the beauty of nature. I even went as far as trying to convince her that since gardeners didn't need to go to college, school was a huge waste of time, and the best education for me was simple. Spend my days watching wild crops so I could learn about nature. Unfortunately, my mom didn't take me too seriously, but as I got older, my dreams changed, and so did my need for certainty in life. Fast forward to the age of 12, I approached my mom, and this time, I actually had it figured out. I was going to go to college, become a lawyer by the age of 25, meet a nice guy, marry him by 27, build my career, and have kids by 30. I wanted 2 kids, 1 boy, 1 girl, but I wasn't too picky about the order. You could say that I've had my life planned out for a while now, and I used to think that I was unique in that. But what I've come to realize is that while others may not have the flowers for their wedding picked out yet, most people have some idea of what they want their future to look like. For some, it's traveling the world. For others, it's having children. But there is not one person who doesn't have a picture of their ideal life. And that's normal. That's human. Dr. Sarah McKay, a PhD neuroscientist, explains that the reason why people tend to plan is because it gives them a sense of control and eases their stress of the unknown. But here's the thing. Life doesn't always follow the path that we want. And when it goes off path, and we find ourselves in unusual circumstances, we begin panicking. Those plans were our way of managing the stress of the unknown. And without them, we feel lost. And that's where we go wrong. We view these unusual circumstances as setbacks when we should be viewing them as a chance for growth. When we stop resisting change and start adapting, we often open new doors we didn't even know existed. New doors that lead to unexpected opportunities, experiences, and relationships. Embracing the unknown helps us grow in ways we never could have even imagined. But the issue is, even after hearing all of this, you're to continue living life the same way. You'll nod in agreement, but ultimately, you won't internalize it. And that's fair. I don't expect you to hear me restate a cliche you've likely heard many times before and completely change how you live your life. But there's a difference between being tired of hearing something and just flat out ignoring it. No matter how many times you're told, the message will never stick. But why? Why won't people act on what they know? At first, I thought it was laziness. Ignoring it is easier because it's convenient. But what I realized is while that may be part of the equation, it's not the entire thing. In actuality, we're just scared. Scared of facing the unknown, scared of making mistakes, and scared of being judged. And that fear doesn't just control how we deal with unusual circumstances. It controls how we live our lives. Oftentimes, we recognize what the right thing to do is, but we consciously make the decision not to do it because we are afraid. And I know for a fact that I am guilty of this. Whether it's what I say or how I dress, I find myself changing just to fit in. Looking back, I wonder if my shift from wanting to be a gardener to wanting to be a lawyer wasn't just about a change in interest, but about conforming to how society values these jobs. Gardeners are often dismissed as unskilled, while lawyers are praised for being intelligent and successful. Maybe my fear of rejection played a role in that shift. And while that fear may be natural, it runs deeper than we realize. This fear can actually be categorized into 2 separate types, internal and external. The internal fear is primal, rooted centuries ago in our ancestors. Back then, sticking to what was normal was essential to survive, so anything outside the norm felt like a threat. Even though we are no longer surviving in the wild and defending ourselves from predators, our brain still reacts the same way to anything unfamiliar, which is why unusual circumstances make us feel so uncomfortable. The external fear exists because we desire social acceptance and fear being judged. Historically, belonging to a group was necessary to survive, and this herd mentality still drives our actions today. Both of these fears are constantly reinforced by a society that very strictly defines what is acceptable. From the moment we're old enough to understand words, we are taught to behave in the correct way and fit into a mold. Even when we know something will benefit us, we hesitate if it doesn't align with societal expectations. And that's sad because it limits our potential and forces us to play by the book. And this pressure doesn't just stop us from growing and harnessing unusual circumstances, it also stops us from living life authentically. Constantly worrying about what others think is shaping almost every aspect of our lives. It dictates how we behave, how we look, what we wear, and even what we say. We change ourselves because that is what we think earns approval. It's no coincidence that consumerism is at an all-time high. Microtrends surrounding clothing, products, and electronics are gaining so much popularity. We no longer purchase what we genuinely want or need, but rather what society tells us we should have. In 2022, Americans spent over $1.7 trillion on consumer products like electronics and clothing. And yet, despite all this consumption, personal debt is also at an all-time high. At the moment, the average American household has over $7,500 in just consumer debt. And as bad as mass consumerism is, this fear of judgment clouds our thinking in even worse ways. Eating disorders and body dysmorphia amongst teens have skyrocketed in recent years, especially with the increased usage of social media. Girls compare themselves to heavily filtered and edited images online, feeling pressure to meet unrealistic beauty standards. This fear of not being perfect leads to harmful behaviors like food restricting, over-exercising, and obsession with physical appearance. 45.2% of girls between the ages of 16 and 19 have admitted to taking part in any weight loss attempts. It's heartbreaking, it really is. But it's the reality of living in a world like ours that is so consumed by fear. Addressing and overcoming this fear is like learning how to ride a bike. You just need practice and persistence. Fortunately, the solution has been around for almost a century. It's a method developed by Joseph Wolf, a South African psychiatrist, known as systematic desensitization. This psychological technique involves gradually exposing yourself to the things you fear in small, manageable steps so you can build resilience over time. Research shows that this method is highly effective, as it has reduced anxiety in over 80% of the people who have actively used it in their life. The thing that makes this approach so easy to apply to our lives is that it doesn't demand immediate, drastic change. In fact, it starts small. It can start by engaging in uncomfortable conversations or sharing an opinion you normally hold back with friends. Over time, taking small steps like these will rewire how your brain responds to fear and make it less paralyzing. This method is especially effective because oftentimes fear triggers a flight or fight response. Our brains want to avoid uncomfortable situations, but systematic desensitization trains our brain to fight rather than flee. By slowly confronting our anxieties, they start to lose their power and become less intense. What once seemed petrifying becomes so much more approachable. By embracing such a strategy, we can transform our relationship with fear and explore unusual circumstances with greater confidence. Being afraid has had too much control over our actions. But that fear isn't there because we are incapable or weak. It's there because we've been conditioned for as long as we can remember to fit in and follow the safe path made for us. But life is unpredictable. Life rarely follows these paths, and we all encounter unusual circumstances at some point or the other. Matter of fact, we live in unusual circumstances right now. We live in a time of AI and self-driving cars. We live in a time of a climate crisis. We live in a time of social movements and cultural shifts. But it's these unusual circumstances that have the most potential for growth, and they're nothing to fear. Chasing this desire to be normal is getting us nowhere. Remember my dream of being a gardener when I was 7? That dream was genuine and pure. It came from my love of gardening with my dad. It wasn't about fitting in. It was simply about doing something that I was passionate about that brought me joy. Maybe I was onto something back then. Maybe there's a part of that 7-year-old inside of all of us that yearns to follow our own path, even if it's unconventional. The first step towards taking control is breaking out of this mindset and realizing that these fears of judgment, failure, and unusual circumstances are not set in stone. They're illusions. It's not that we can't tear them down, it's that tearing them down feels uncomfortable. But if we don't face that discomfort, we will stay stuck. We may not be in control of what happens in life, but we are in control of how we respond. When we as individuals learn to confront our fears and embrace uncertainty, we open ourselves up to growth. And that has a ripple effect. A society that embraces the unknown fosters innovation, creativity, and empathy. If we can step outside of our comfort zones and encourage others to do the same, then we can transform our community into one that is more resilient, open-minded, and diverse. So stop fearing unusual circumstances and start viewing them as opportunities to redefine the norm. And hey, if all else fails, there's always gardening. Thank you.